All right. So thank you all for being here. My name is Christina, and I'm a regional coordinator in upstate New York for SheJumps. I'm located near the Saratoga area. I know we have attendees from all over. It's really cool reading all your responses. We've got someone from Bend and Washington and Boise, Idaho, and Salt Lake City, Utah. So that's awesome. Thanks for joining tonight. And so in case you haven't heard of SheJumps before, SheJumps is a national nonprofit, and we are dedicated to increasing the participation of women and girls in outdoor activities. We believe that spending time outside helps foster leadership, confidence, and builds community. SheJumps was founded in 2007 around the idea of if she can do it, so can I. And whether it was skiing, climbing, mountain biking, any outdoor activity, SheJumps wanted to make sure we celebrate the accomplishments of all women from beginners to pro athletes and provide them with a support system where they would feel confident taking jumps to try something new. We have a variety of programs. We host over 150 programs a year. 35% of those are free or low cost. We also have scholarship opportunities. It's called a snowpack scholarship. So if you're interested in the level 1, level 2 avalanche courses, definitely pay attention to our social media and website because they'll have some opportunities for that. This year's is over with, but there's always next year. We have chapters all across the United States, so feel free to go on our website, find your local chapter, and there's a lot of activity in the Facebook groups, so please check those out as well. Safety first. So safety should always be a top priority when you're spending time outside. It's really exciting to jump right into something new, but it's also important to be prepared before you head out. So that's what tonight's event is all about. This is a 101 series. So Danielle's going to be giving us the intro information we need to get started with ski touring. Danielle is a AIR certified ski touring guide, and she's extremely passionate about growing the sport. So without further delay, I'd like to pass it off to Danielle. She's going to introduce herself and get started. So thank you, Danielle, for being here with us tonight.
Hi, all. Thanks for being with me tonight on this presentation. I'm super excited to give it because it's something I'm super passionate about, and I think that there's a gap in kind of the education of how you get from resort skiing to backcountry, and I think there are a lot of steps that you can take in between to make it not so scary and not such a big jump. I'm currently an undergrad at Colby College and just committed to University of Wyoming for a neuroscience PhD, but I also guide with inclusive ski touring and have helped out at a few SheJumps events over the past 2 years and have loved it. I am Pro 1 certified by the American Avalanche Institute, and that has been, I was the first woman on the East Coast to get that certification. So I'm stoked to share some things with you guys tonight about ski touring. So we're going to go over resort touring, some gear, layering, and then a quick part 2 on kind of just like intro to avalanches, assessing danger, and an overall like backcountry or touring checklist. I just want to reiterate that anything talked about of and avalanches and stuff does not replace taking an Area 1 course or other avalanche education. So if you're looking to do that, reach out to some of those SheJumps events or look up other providers in your area for opportunities to further your education. So what is ski touring? It's going uphill on skis. It can be earning your turns, a workout, a way to meet new friends. It can be done in the backcountry or in resorts. What do you need to start ski touring? So in general, in the resort, which you also would need all these things in the backcountry, but you need a little bit less to be touring in the resort than in the backcountry. So you need all your typical ski gear like skis, helmet, goggles, boots, poles, bindings, but you also need skins. So there's really only one additional factor, even though some of the equipment can be a little bit different. but we'll get into different types of equipment and how you can make that transition a little smoother a little later in this PowerPoint. In the backcountry, you need a few more things. You need a bit of a bigger pack, beacon, shovel, and probe for avalanche rescue, a medical kit, and it would be good to have a type of ARI or medical certification as well. So I just want to talk about the differences between backcountry skiing and ski touring, because I think that these terms are used interchangeably a lot of times in the ski community. I certainly use them interchangeably all the time. However, they definitely mean different things, and I think that using them interchangeably can provide a barrier that is a little bit more restrictive into getting into the sport. So I want to define them individually. Ski touring is just the activity of going uphill on skis with skins on. Backcountry skiing refers to ski touring out of bounds, not in the resort, that can be accessed by hiking, skinning, or heli skiing, but it's more referring to the terrain you're in, where ski touring is referring to the sport itself. However, I think it can be really intimidating when people use them interchangeably. So I just thought I would say that they are used interchangeably, and I don't think that's something that we're going to change, but I think that it's something to be aware of and can make it a little bit less intimidating. So what is in-resort touring? Because you might not realize that a lot of people tour in resorts. It's not all just backcountry, and it's a really great way to get into the sport. So whether you go with a friend, by yourself, or join a group like inclusive ski touring, which we'll talk about later, it can be a great way of enjoying the sport without added risk to the backcountry. Another advantage is that it can be much more accessible if you live close enough. Many people will opt for a pre or a post-work lap, but make sure to check your local resort's uphill policy. So if you type in any of your local resorts and uphill policy into Google, you'll find it out pretty quickly usually. If not, you can always call your local resort and ask them what their uphill policy is. Typically, they'll have restrictive hours or just like certain times that you're allowed to be on or off the hill. Vail Resorts usually just does like before or after the mountain opens, where other resorts like Mount Abrams does only during operating hours. Typically, if you have a season pass to that mountain, you will not need to purchase an additional uphill pass. Other mountains, you will need to purchase an uphill pass, or if you don't have a season pass, you need an uphill pass, but they can be as cheap as $5. I know Mount Abrams, where I do a lot of touring with inclusive ski touring, their pass is only $5 a day. So it can be a really affordable way to enjoy skiing. Yeah, just make sure to follow the rules that are listed on the website and all the etiquettes there so that everyone can enjoy continuing to use that space. But yeah. So what is inclusive ski touring? They are a newly founded nonprofit organization. We actually just became a nonprofit this year, and we started as a group of friends, but grew over to 200 participants last winter. And it was apparent that we needed to form a formal organization. And so we strive to welcome everyone and make ski touring a really open environment to everyone, and just get everyone introduced to the joys of skiing and split boarding. We run many programs for historically underrepresented groups in the outdoor space, such as our women's programs, which happen every Saturday, which are the ones that I mainly lead. But this year we have also branched out and done some BIPOC and LGBTQ plus only tours led by members of those communities. So it's a really cool program, and if you are on the Northeast, highly recommend checking it out after this presentation. If not, there are also some other groups out west that do local touring. They might be a little more informal, but there are a lot of local groups that will get together and go tour up local in-resort hills So that's a great way to meet people getting into the sport and find some people to go with and explore with. So let's talk about some gear and how you can actually get into the sport. So bindings are a big part. And so a lot of people, including myself, start with frame bindings. And some pros are that they're very similar to downhill bindings. I'll show a video of how each type of these bindings work in a bit, but they're very heavy. So if you're just going for a single lap in the resort, it's a great way to start because you probably don't need to change out your normal recreational boot, because nowadays most recreational boots have a walk mode built in. So you won't need any special pin bindings or anything like that. So they'll also be super secure in a resort, and they're generally on the cheaper side of the bindings. If you are thinking about, doing a lot of laps in a day, or you want to be really fast and light, or thinking about going into the backcountry, tech bindings are a really, really great option. They are the most popular option that people use touring. They're really light. The only downside is they definitely take some getting used to, and they're not quite as stable, but for most people, that's okay. I personally use the bindings that are more in between hybrid bindings. I used to ski race. I raced FIS for 7 years. So when I make a turn, it's a pretty aggressive force. So I like my heel to be clipped in pretty tight. So I use the in-between bindings. I shed a little bit of weight on them, unfortunately, but they're not quite as heavy as frame bindings, but they're just a few ounces heavier than tech bindings. So bindings all depend on the type of skiing that you want. I know a lot of people that start off with frame bindings if they're not quite sure what direction you're going to go in ski touring. If you know that you want to start in resort and then immediately start going in the backcountry, something like a tech binding would probably be best for you. But if you talk to anyone at your local shops, knowing the options is really helpful, just so that you kind of know what you could potentially ask for. So here's a video of how frame bindings work. Every pair of bindings from every brand is a little bit different, but this will give you a pretty general view of how the bindings work.
So I have frame bindings. In a few spots, is put them in walk mode. You lift up on the sealed piece, just one foot, and this is free up. And pretty simple. All you have to do after that is just put your toe in and then put down until this part comes up, and you're ready to go.
So frame bindings, pretty simple. They're very, very similar to normal resort bindings that you would be used to. The only difference is they have that little click to put them into walk mode.
Oops. So I have frame bindings.
So tech bindings.
Is that I have a pin here, which they're frozen, so they're stuck. But I will push them, and then I push that kind of pad down, and it stick it, and then I just flip that around so that I don't lock in.
Yeah, so they're definitely a little different. They look a little wonky compared to maybe what you're normally used to with a resort type binding. They definitely take some getting used to, but all my friends that have them are very happy with them. So would recommend for a lighter touring setup. And then these are the bindings that I have.
So I have the in-between binding. They are a little bit more secure. Since I used to race, I need to be held in a little bit tighter. So for the uphill portion, I just push down so my brakes come up, and I grab this lever back here and I bring it all the way forward. So then my heel is up, and then I will just push down on the toe piece and slide my pins in, and then grab the top and put them into walk mode.
Yeah. So the reason that I show these videos is because when I'm guiding intro programs, I find that a lot of people, they were shown once in the shop, but it's a little different in the shop than when you're actually out there trying to get your own foot in them on the snow. So I think just having a couple different forms of being shown how you actually put them in, because it is different than alpine bindings. And I think sometimes it's something that's overlooked as something that could be a little difficult, but I just want to make it so that it's not a added barrier to something that's already a new sport for someone just getting into it. So can you use your current downhill boots? Short answer is yes. I started in my 130 flex racing lace up boots. They were heavy, they were uncomfortable, my feet burned every time, and I was significantly slower than my friends who were in much worse shape than me. But did I do it? Yeah. So you can do it. It's just a matter of comfort. So if you already have a rec boot that has pins in it, or you're thinking of getting a frame binding, and you're really thinking of mostly doing resort laps, I really would not go out and buy another boot. It's going to be expensive. You're going to have to get it fitted. You're going to have to break it in just like any other boot. So if you have something that works, and especially for what you want to do, I would just keep it that way. A lot of resort boots nowadays have a walk mode, which is probably the most essential thing I would say to get. Can you tour in boots that don't have a walk mode? Absolutely, I have. But your feet are going to hurt. So I would recommend having a boot that has walk mode at least. And then if you want tech bindings or the hybrid bindings that I have, you're going to need a boot that has pins. You can see the pin holes really well on those middle Scarpa boots, but all three of these boots have pins added in. These Rossis over here are an example of what would be more of a resort boot with touring capabilities. This is the perfect type of boot for someone that's just getting into touring. Maybe he's going to take a couple uphill laps in the season, but is mainly going to then go and shred the resort afterwards. This middle boot is what I have, and I find it's quite secure. It's not the lightest boot that they make for touring, but it's definitely a whole lot lighter than that Rossi boot or a normal recreational boot. It's also going to have a little bit more give in the walk than another boot will. And I think that this is like the most well-rounded, comprehensive boot for someone that's either getting into touring and wanting to experience some backcountry, going to do a lot of touring laps, or is going to do a lot of backcountry skiing, but is going to really put some emphasis on the downhill portion of the backcountry skiing, which in my personal opinion is the most fun part. And then those Dynafits that you see on the right, those are what are called skimo boots. So as you get into touring, you're going to hear the term skimo thrown around probably quite a bit. Skimo is just short for ski mountaineering, and it refers to people that race uphill and downhill for ski mountaineering, and they'll use really, really, really light equipment. It might give in some performance on the downhill, but it is very, very light, so you can really go uphill efficiently. This would definitely not be a boot for someone just getting into touring. It's going to be very expensive. It's going to be very light, but it's not going to be super performing in any way besides light. If you do end up deciding that you're going to try and do 10 uphill laps in the resort before work, then maybe you want to look into something like that. But I wouldn't recommend it as like a beginner boot, but I'm just showing it so that you guys kind of know what is out there. And if you walk into a shop and someone tries to say, oh, here's a really light boot for you, you might be able to say like, oh no, I want to enjoy my turns on the way down.
Before you move on, I know I said I would keep the Q&A till the end, but someone did ask if you could provide the name of the Scarpa boot that you have. So since we're on the slide, I just figured.
I have to look it up, but I definitely, because I bought them 5 years ago, but I absolutely can.
Thank you.
Yeah, here, give me 3 seconds and I can look it up.
Oh.
I have the Scarpa Gia Alpine Touring boot. There are a couple different versions of the Scarpa one that a bunch of my friends and I all have. This one is the one with the stiffest flex, but they make one that's, I think, white that has a little bit of a softer flex. So the one that I have is, I think, 110 or 115, and I think the white one is 90. So do with that information what you will. So what about skins? Because they're the most essential part of a ski touring setup. But I would say they're actually the part of buying a setup that I would worry the least about. You can actually see in this picture of me ripping off my skins, I'm there in the pink pants in the middle. There's a bunch of clumps on the bottom, those holes that you can see all the way through to my bases. Pretty gross. My skins have taken a beating. I have gotten new ones since then, but for me, I got these black diamond ones, and I know a lot of my friends have as well, because they were the cheapest. And to be honest, when you're starting out, you really don't need a skin that has a certain performance capability. I've been touring for probably 8 or so years now, and only this year did I buy a skin with specific capabilities as I'm moving into like really big objectives and guiding more. So I would say getting a skin that you're kind of just, you're going to go through them. They're going to take a beating. You're walking around on them all day long. All they are is fabric and glue. So if you walk over a rock, it's done. So there's no point in buying really expensive skins when you're probably going to replace them at least every other year. If they last you longer than that, great. Mine have not. But I've found that the black diamond ones, they're really sticky, maybe a little too sticky even, but they do the job and they get you up the hill. They're not that expensive. You can usually find them on sale. So I would just recommend kind of going with whatever you can get your hands on for a smaller price, because at the end of the day, you're not even going to know what type of capabilities you want in your skin until you have like a lot of days going uphill on snow in different types of terrain. So even though it's the most important part, I would say it's really not important which type you get. One other thing is, if you're buying them online, it's kind of confusing. You buy them based on like the range that your ski length is. So if you have a ski that's like 102 centimeters, or like 160 centimeters long, you're gonna want to buy a ski that's like skin that's between like 158 and 165. They'll be adjustable based off of like the tailpiece. You can adjust to be within like, I guess like this much usually, give or take, to be like tighter or looser. And then when you get the skin, it usually comes with a little tool to cut it, which if you're comfortable, you can watch a YouTube video and cut it yourself. But also if you took it into any ski shop, they'd be happy to cut it for you. So buying skins, I know, can be a little confusing because it's like, oh, this arbitrary range. But when in doubt, call your local shop and just be like, hey, this is a ski that I have. Here are the specs on it. What size skin should I get? But it's usually pretty arbitrary. Buy them bigger rather than smaller because it's pretty arbitrary, because everything's adjustable and you can cut them to the perfect size. So let's talk about some layering, because it's very, very different layering for ski touring than it is for hiking or for normal alpine skiing. So on the uphill, typically this is what I wear. And so there is no right or wrong in layering, but this is what I typically wear and what I know that a lot of my friends will swap out the different options for. So typically I'll start off with some sort of base layer, any base layer that you like and know kind of wicks sweat pretty decently, you know, doesn't stay super soggy for a long time. It is great. Personally, I only like to wear one layer on my legs because I get pretty hot when I'm going uphill. It's a pretty good workout. So I like to be able to take things on and off pretty easily. So a pullover or a zip up type of fleece is a great option. And then personally, I really like to wear some sort of shell and shell pants over that. We have a lot of people from the West Coast in here tonight. So I know when I'm at home, you know, in Colorado, I don't typically wear the fleece because it's just not as cold. It's not as frigid. And then sometimes when I'm out here on Mount Washington, where the winds are up to 150 miles per hour, I'm probably wearing a little bit more than just a shell. But I would say if any given day, this is like my base that I'm building off of. So whether I'm adding layers or taking away layers from this, I would say like this is my base that I build off of. You can do a lot of combinations. You can swap out the pullover for like a vest or a light puffy, depending on the temperature. You can swap out the coat for a bigger or a lighter coat. Some people like touring in insulated pants. That's totally cool. To each their own. I know me and a lot of people I tour with, we like just shell pants. They typically come with a lot of zipper vents, so you can cool down really quickly and warm back up really quickly as well. The reason I'm talking about layering is it's really, really important in ski touring, especially once you start doing backcountry ski touring, if that's a direction you want to go in. It's not as important in the resort, but it's definitely going to make your time a lot more enjoyable if you're the right temperature. You're going to be sweating on the way up, but you really do not want to soak through all your layers. So right when you feel yourself getting warm, you want to be taking off a layer and then just continuing that process. So having a lot of different layers and figuring out what layering system works for you is really important, because right when you get to the top and you're ripping off your skins and you're putting your helmet on and you're changing all these things and then you're skiing down and you're going fast in the wind, you get really cold really quick. So it's really nice to be able to kind of control, even though you're heating up, you're able to control your cooling off capabilities by the use of layers. I would also say that like having extra gloves is a huge game changer. I really like to tour in like a light pair of gloves. I actually have these exact Dynafit gloves up top in blue that I uphill in. They're pretty light. They are, I know a lot of my friends though just tour in liners on the way up. And then for me, especially, like my gloves get really sweaty and then my fingers get really cold really fast once I stop moving. So once you stop moving, when you get to the top, the first thing that I do, even if I'm going to hang out there for a while, I'm not going to take my skins off. The first thing I do is I change my gloves, because fingers and toes will go the quickest in the cold, as most of you probably know. So having a nice warm pair of like Kinkos or mittens, whatever gloves or mittens you like to be warm in for the downhill is huge. And then if you're in somewhere really cold like the Northeast and you're going to be up on Mount Washington, or you're going to be deep in the backcountry at any point, or you're somewhere really windy, I highly recommend getting an expedition puffy or a belay puffy, which essentially is just a really big puffy. As you can see in this picture, I look like a giant blue marshmallow. But I'm a warm giant blue marshmallow. So I would definitely recommend having something like that. And I know it's going to be above like 20 degrees all day, I always carry one in my pack, because they compact down to like this big most of the time. And it's just a really easy way to be really warm really fast. And then a lot of you out on the West Coast, where snow is prevalent in longer months in the spring and early summer, it's really great to have a layer that's really, really light but still covers, because nobody wants skin cancer. Everyone wants to be protected from the sun. So having a layer that will protect from that extra UV light coming down, especially in those warmer months where it's really hot, so you really don't want to be wearing a heavy layer. REI has a bunch of great ones. Outdoor Research has a bunch of great ones. I found most of mine secondhand at thrift stores, so there's a lot of great options for that. But definitely still remember to stay covered up and that the sun reflects off the snow, even when it's warm and toasty out. But yeah, that's all I have on layers, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that at the end, because there's a million trillion combinations of layers that you could do to be correct, and none of them are wrong. But making sure you have enough layers so that no matter what the day throws at you, you're going to be a comfortable temperature really makes a huge difference in enjoying your day.
You're making me jealous talking about the sun. No sun here.
Yeah, this weekend got up to go tour and it was negative 18 degrees and I was like, oh no. So where do you get gear? We just talked about all this gear, we talked about all these options. So now what? Well, the first thing I would say is support your local shops. There are a lot of great people, a lot of really knowledgeable people at all of your local gear shops. I like to give some extra info like we just did on gear before that, just because I know as women, it can be a little intimidating walking into a gear shop where typically there's mainly men working there, and every once in a while you'll get someone that's trying to mansplain every single thing to you. I know that I have a friend on the World Cup mountain biking circuit, and she walked into a gear shop asking for a bike part, like specifically for her bike, and they tried to like sell her on a beginner bike, and she was like, dude, no. So I know that it can be kind of a weird space to walk into with no knowledge, and you'd never want to be the person that's like, oh, I have no idea, am I getting the right stuff or not? So I think having some background for a starting point to go into your local shops and then get great advice off of that is really helpful and makes those experiences a lot nicer most of the time. If that's not an option and you're maybe looking for something on the cheaper side or used, these are some other sites that I have had a great experience using myself. Outdoor Gear Exchange, they have, most of their website is not like sales stuff, but there's like a sales section of Outdoor Gear Exchange that's really good. Sideline Swaps, Deep and Cheap, The House, and Gear Trade are all really great places to get gear. And then also checking local like recycled gear shops is great. Like I got my Telemark bindings at a local used gear shop for $10, never used. So finding stuff like that at local shops. Also for layering, if you're looking for big expedition puffies or light layers, they're also, your used gear shops are very, very full of those types of things. So those are some options. Steep and Cheap and The House are more of like discounted gear from previous seasons, and then Sideline Swap, Gear and Gear Trade are more of like people selling their used or like misbought gear to other people. But I've bought things from all of these sites and have had really good experiences. Just some like general tips for uphill travel. Make sure your boots are in walk mode on the way up and in ski mode on your way down. Having your boots in walk mode on the ski down can be like the easiest way to do your tib fib. So nobody wants a broken leg, and it's a really easy thing to avoid. So make sure that your boots are always in the right mode for the activity that you're doing. You'll know pretty quickly, but it's a super easy thing to forget. And I know I still forget it every once in a while because there are just other things you're focused on sometimes. And if you're touring back-to-back days and only have one pair of skins, which most people only have one pair of skins, make sure to dry them. Just like you would dry the liners of your boots, dry your skins, because especially if the snow's wet, like a really spring day or even summer day for those of you on the West, your skins are going to get really soggy and they're not going to stick as well once they're soggy. So if you're doing multiple days in a row, just make sure to hang them up the same way you would hang up anything else that's wet. Same with bindings, make sure that they are fully in walk mode on the uphill. Some bindings, you can have them in like partial modes because as you saw in the videos, there's like 2 processes or more to get them into their walk mode. So just making sure that you went through every single step with your specific binding on how to get it into walk mode because it will save your hips. So also one last thing, like remember to hydrate. It's a sport. You're going to be sweating. I know sometimes you might not be that sweaty and because it's cold and windy and whatever, but really remember to hydrate. I would say that's like the biggest thing is water. And if you're doing longer tours, obviously bring like food and other things like that. But even just for a resort tour, remember to bring water. So our second portion. So you want to try backcountry. So just to reiterate some of the things that I think are 100% necessary for backcountry travel. You need a pack to store all your gear in. You need a beacon, a shovel, and a probe. You know, there's this saying in the backcountry where if your partner shows up to the parking lot without a beacon, shovel, and probe, you give them yours, because at the end of the day, it's not really about saving your life. It's about them being able to save like yours. So if they don't have the gear and you get avalanched, then you're kind of done for, as opposed to like if they messed up. But in my personal opinion, if someone doesn't show up with the gear, you just don't go that day. And I know that if someone showed up to a tour I was guiding, like on Washington, they would not be coming that day if we didn't have extra. So I think that those are like the 3 absolute necessary things for backcountry travel are a beacon, a shovel, and a probe, because that can save someone's life. Someone could only be buried like half a foot under an avalanche and have a really easy survival rate. But if you don't have all the necessary equipment and know how to use them, then that can turn into a really different situation. And then how to use them, I'm not going to get into that today, but there are some intro courses I know around the country and that kind of set you up for going into your Area 1, and then also just taking an Area 1 course. There are a lot of scholarships out there, especially for women, to take avalanche education courses, and I would highly recommend taking one if you're thinking about doing any type of backcountry like snow travel. And then the other thing is just a medical kit. So just like any outdoor activity that you're away from immediate medical care, having a medical kit is a great thing to carry. And on those same lines, having a WUFA or something of similar stature is also a great thing. If you don't know what a WUFA is, it's a wilderness first aid certification. They also give out a lot of scholarships for women to take those courses. So highly would recommend any of those things if you really want to get into backcountry travel. So let's talk a little bit about avalanches. An avalanche is kind of just like a point release. It can be a point release or a whole long release of snow. And you can have rock avalanches. It's kind of just like the downfall of debris. So on the one side, you have a slab avalanche, and on the other, you have a loose avalanche. A slab is a bigger section of snow coming off. A lot of times, there are a lot of different types of slabs, which we'll talk about in a second. And then this is mainly what you think of when you think of an avalanche. A loose avalanche can also be known as slough. So if you're skiing bigger lines, you'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, you have to outrun your slough. So when you see the snow falling in a Warren Miller film and the skiers kind of like skiing around it but not getting taken out by it, that's slough. So you might have even triggered slough within a resort setting if you're on a steep run and, you know, there's some snow kind of falling down, maybe rolling a little bit. That's like a loose avalanche, but it's just slough. So they're not typically a big concern. Slabs are usually what we're most concerned about. So here are the main types of slab avalanches: loose snow, loose wet avalanches, which typically turn into cement if they're a lot bigger. So loose wet avalanches, wind slab avalanches, wet avalanches, and snowstorm avalanches. The debris from those types of avalanches a lot of times turn into like cement snow. So you really want to try to avoid a lot of these things. So having the avalanche education to learn how to avoid them, and just kind of knowing not to go out on those days, or knowing to only go low angle terrain, is really important in making backcountry decisions. Deep slab avalanches are something that if you're really getting into backcountry travel, like for me, I've been watching the forecast all season, even if I haven't been going out all season, because that's how deep slab avalanches form. Early in the season, if we get some fluctuating temperatures and snowfall, there will form what's called a weak layer in the snowpack, and those can be triggered. All the snow that accumulates on top can then trigger an avalanche throughout the season. So that's definitely a more advanced thing to look out for. The other ones are a little easier to kind of start to learn as you get more and more backcountry experience. So how do we assess danger in America? We use the North American Public Avalanche Danger Scale. So before going out, you definitely need to be checking the forecast, not just the weather, but also your local avalanche center forecast. So out on the East Coast, we have MWAC, which is the Mount Washington Weather Avalanche Forecasting Center. And in Colorado, I know we have SEAC, which is the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. So look up whatever your local one is, or whatever the one within the terrain you'll be traveling is. And every day or every couple of days, depending on how they do your region, they'll be putting out different danger scales. And so personally, I don't go out over anything higher than considerable. But you know, your risk tolerance is your own risk tolerance. So if you only will go out on days that have low, then that's fine, and just only go on days that are low. But knowing kind of what these mean, if you want to take a screenshot of this chart or look it up later, just kind of getting familiar with it and knowing what the chart means is a great way to kind of start to be prepared and know what information you're being given and what it means. So it's really just all about know before you go, look at the weather, look at the forecast, make sure you have a plan, map your up and downhill route on something like CalTopo to understand any hazards you could encounter. And first and foremost, I really recommend taking an avalanche course if you're backcountry traveling, so that you can also learn how to dig a snow pit and make these assessments for yourself. Because a lot of times, I know out in Colorado, they'll forecast for a whole very large area, including multiple mountain ranges, but they'll only take a snapshot from one location, and that will then be the forecast for that whole range. So being able to make these calls and assessments yourself is a really big plus, and will give you a lot more information than what might otherwise be available. So this is just a screenshot of kind of what CalTopo, which is a free mapping software that a lot of people use. I know a lot of people also have been using Onyx Backcountry, which I've heard good things about, but personally haven't ventured into yet. CalTopo, like I'm sure Onyx does, has options so that you can put the slope degrees on the map, so that when you're mapping your route, you know what the different degrees of the slope is. This is really important because most avalanches are triggered on a 30-degree to 45-degree slope. So that's a really important thing to be thinking of. You don't want to if it's a higher hazard day, you don't want to be triggering something onto other parties or yourself, but you also want to make sure that you're aware of what is called an overhead hazard. So anything above you that you're in the line of. So you would not want to be traveling below like a really touchy slope on a high like danger day, because that means another party, or even not another party, it could be a natural avalanche, could be triggered on top of you. So knowing your slope degrees and kind of how to navigate around them or through them safely is a really big advantage to backcountry travel. And then on the left is a nice chart that I stole from the American Avalanche Institute. And I think it's just a really good comprehensive checklist. So feel free to take a screenshot of that or look it up too. I don't know if it's online, but I think it's just a really good comprehensive checklist to have traveling the backcountry. Making sure that you're knowing before you go. So checking all of your current conditions in your area, knowing if there are any current avalanche problems in the area, which is maybe a little bit more advanced and you need a little bit more training to kind of know, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind and start asking. If you're traveling with people that know a little more and you see a slide, be like, hey, do you know what type of slide that is? So you can kind of start to get familiar with the types of slides and maybe what has caused them. Knowing what your terrain options for the day is. You might go out with this really big objective, get out there and know that your the trail that you want to do it's just not going to be doable that day for a variety of reasons. Avalanche, weather, your group's too fatigued to get up there. But having a backup plan is always a really good option for a backcountry tour, or even if a backup downhill route, because sometimes you tour up, the tour is fine, and you get to the top and you decide, hey, the snowpack should not be skied. So how are you going to get down? And then just making sure that you're doing other checks, like checking with your whole team's beacons are working before you go up. And then post-trip discussions are also a really good thing. And I think they don't even just apply to ski touring, but any outdoor trip, especially if you're the one planning it or planning it with a few different people. Just kind of talking about, like, did you make good decisions that day? How could you have made better decisions? And like kind of just how can you improve your overall decision making for the future? And I think that's a really valuable skill in outdoor sports. So yeah, I think it's a really helpful checklist, but you don't have to do anything a certain way, but I think it's helpful. Yeah, so just make sure if you're interested in AIRE, SheJumps offers a variety of different AIRE courses as well as intro to backcountry courses. This QR code will take you, I think, to the events page of SheJumps. So that's rad. And then this is the sign up for, I think I linked it to the women's programs, which feel free to reach out with any questions about them. And it's free to sign up if I didn't mention that. And we also offer rental gear for uphill touring, which is super sweet. Our rental setups, I think, are $40 for the day. And then the tours are free because we are a nonprofit, just like SheJumps. So we run off of donations. So if you would like to donate to either company, that would be super rad, but no pressure. Yeah, so are you stoked? Here's some contact information, and I'm happy to answer some questions. Feel free to take a picture of this as well, just so you have everyone's contact. If you want to reach out to any of us, you can email me, DM me. I'm sure you can email and DM Zach and Christina as well. Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. That was great. We do have one question, and it has to do with the map you showed. So someone asked, how can you identify slope angle on CalTopo? Are you inferring this information from the topo lines, or is that a feature of the app?
So it's actually the colors. I didn't include the color thing, which probably would have been a good thing to include, but the yellow is like the lowest angle and those dark purples are the steepest. So purple, I think, is actually around 50, 60 degrees when yellow and orange is about like 10 to 30 degrees. So it's the colors on the map that show the angles. But it's a cool software to play around with. There are a lot more features than just that, but I would say that's my favorite one when I'm planning a trip.
Oh, cool. We have another one, and this one is on gear. It says, do you need any particular type of skis different from alpine resort skiing, or is it just different bindings / boots plus skins?
So short answer is technically no, but just like everything else, you're going to be a lot happier with a lighter ski. But depending on the type of skiing that you're doing, this is the reason I didn't quite go into skis, is because it's going to be very different person to person because of whatever level you ski at, whatever terrain you're going to be skiing, what type of snow you're going to be skiing, and then your personal preference with if you're going to want to kind of sacrifice a little bit of weight for more of a performance ski on the downhill, or if you're really concerned on going really fast on the uphill and you don't really care about the downhill. So personally, I have my touring set up currently on like what I would call either a narrow powder ski or a wide all mountain ski. Because I like to go touring when there's a lot of fluffy snow. And if I'm going to go out and arc one run, they do the job. So they're a little heavier than my friends that skimo for sure, but they're also pretty light. So they're a lot lighter than like a race ski or like a carving ski. So I would recommend something that's more along the lines of a all mountain ski. But that would be one that definitely to like figure out what you would want on your own. And, if you do think, you're welcome to send me a DM or a text or an email or something. And I'm happy to kind of steer you in the direction that would pertain to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, how often do you use ski crampons and when do you use them?
I've honestly never used them. If it's icy enough to be using ski crampons, I probably have actual crampons in my pack and have always this far opted to just boot packing in my crampons with an ice axe instead of ski crampons. This is probably because of the terrain that I'm in. I think that if I was consistently encountering icy slopes at mild to a little above mild degrees, then I would invest in ski crampons. However, the only times that I really encounter slopes that I would need crampons on and can't just like go off trail for a minute to go around the icy section would be up on Tuckerman's Ravine, where then I'm probably boot packing with crampons and an ice axe. It definitely depends again on where you live. If you're going to be consistently traveling on mid to steeper slopes for long periods of time that are going to be slicker, then you probably would want ski crampons. However, it has to be pretty slick to be getting into that terrain. So it'd be pretty icy. But if that's what you're doing, then ski crampons would be the way to go. But personally, I've actually never even used them. I've just ice axed and cramponed the way up.
Ice axe, that sounds scary.
It's way less scary than it sounds.
So when you're boot packing, you're like you're carrying your skis with you and you're like traveling up in your boots.
My pack, I just like put my skis like A-framed on my pack and put a ski strap around at the top, so they're on my back, and my poles are also in my pack, so I just have my ice axe in hand.
Okay. And the next question is, advice for picking routes in the backcountry, word of mouth, or are there good websites for this?
It's very dependent on where you live. Some areas have awesome, really detailed guidebooks, and there's a version, I think it's called like Snow Project or Powder Project or something, a version of Mountain Project that I've tried to put some lines on in Colorado, and then but it's very iffy. Once again, I've heard good things about Backcountry on X. I think they've had some routes put in to theirs in some places, but I'm not quite sure. I would say a lot of it is definitely like word of mouth. And trying to find guidebooks. I haven't really found too many online resources that are great. I would say that my best option has been like guidebooks, but then also if you take like an Area 1 course, typically they will go into route mapping. So if there's not a route established, but there's somewhere I want to ski, I will look at like CalTopo and another map and a satellite view and kind of map my own route in and out, and I'll be able to follow that like using features of like CalTopo on my phone. I would say it's kind of hard to just go word of mouth because some people are kind of gatekeepy with it, and I think that's why there's not a lot of really great online resources. Like when I put some routes on whatever Powder Project, Snow Project, whatever it's called, I actually had a like friend be like, "Hey, like, why'd you post this run?" Even though it's not like a secret run, it's one of the most popular runs in my entire area, and anyone that ski tours knows it, and there are probably 50 people that go on it a day minimum. But it can kind of be one of those things that are people like, "Oh, it's my private powder stash. Like, I don't want to tell people about it." But I would say for the most part, people are pretty nice in telling you where to go and like giving advice. So asking is always a great resource. And then there are also a lot of guidebooks, especially for out west. And then in the east, there's a good one called like Skiing in the Presidential Range, which I have, which is really good and shows a lot of good lines. But yeah, kind of a mix.
Cool. The next question is, what is your preferred technique to transition from uphill travel to downhill?
My preferred technique. I mean, I guess like I have been staying in my skis more recently and just ripping my skins off and plopping my bindings back down while I'm standing on them. However, that doesn't really work with most shift bindings, so it's very gear dependent. And if you have really sticky skins, that's also going to be harder. So in the past, I wasn't able to do it because my skins were overly sticky, so I couldn't really rip them off. But my new skins, I can just one rip and they're off nice and smooth. I'm not quite sure if that answers your question. So if not, feel free to like type a new one.
Thank you. And the next question is, do they make collapsible ski poles to attach to your pack?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Almost everyone has the collapsible ones. They're just like collapsible hiking poles, just with like different baskets. And they're usually even a little cheaper. But I think almost every company that makes poles makes the collapsible version.
Great. Sounds easy enough. Does anyone else have any last questions? Because we're wrapping up here. I don't see anything else coming through in the Q&A. So I just want to make sure we don't leave anyone out if they had questions. But otherwise, I think that's about it. So thank you. Someone asked a question. What do you think of dogs in the backcountry? Last question.
I think that personally, like, I love a trail dog. However, I don't know that I would want to ski in the backcountry with my own dog. So I think it's a personal risk that you have to assess. My best friend skis with her dog in the backcountry all the time, and so does her sister. And her sister actually ended up falling and slicing her dog's leg and had to carry her bleeding dog out to the hospital. So the dog was fine, totally fine, everyone was fine, but it, you know, you're putting yourself in a situation where that can happen. And even if you're a really confident skier, I mean, this girl raced FIS on the NORAM circuit for just as long as I have, and yeah, things can just happen. You can slip, you can fall, anyone can fall. An avalanche can happen, your dog can get buried. I know there were some avalanches early this season where a dog got buried. Not good results. So I think it's definitely your personal risk that you have to be okay with. So for me, I love seeing dogs on the trail. I love petting them. I love dogs, but I would not want to bring my own dog on the trail because of the added risk.
Makes sense. I can appreciate that. I know they even have like first aid courses, because not even skiing or avalanches, but just being out hiking and something happens and you've got to step in. So
They actually, I
awesome.
think, do make dog beacons though. If you are like super into the dog in the backcountry, I think that they make like little doggy vests that you can put beacons in, or I think like Peeps maybe makes them. And then they also make like stop the bleed kits for dogs. And then also one more thing on dogs is check if you're resorting with a dog. That's another thing that some resorts are like super cool with. And that can be like I think that can be like a more controlled setting. If you early morning, you know, it's just going to be you out and it's a wide open groomed trail where like a dog can be great for skiing with. And just because there's a lot of less risk factors involved. And then, but just making sure you know your resort's like uphill dog policy or dog policy in general. Most resorts are like super cool with them, but you know, you get some that are weird with it.
Yeah, always best to ask first. You never know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined tonight. And thank you for anyone who donated to SheJumps. And I hope that you guys continue to check out our website, check out our Facebook pages. If you are looking for people to do this with, definitely find your Facebook group. You know, I've met some good friends through SheJumps, and that's where I've learned how to do a lot of things. So it's a really good community, and I highly recommend checking it out. And I hope that we'll see you on another event. So thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. And thank you, Danielle. This was wonderful. You did a great job. Thanks for all this information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. It was great talking to you all. And yeah, please feel free to reach out in any form with any more questions or just to chat. Yeah.
Awesome.